So you were raised and born in Los Angeles, Southeast LA, right?
No, I wasn't born in LA. I was born in Washington, D.C., but
Uh-huh.
kindergarten through law school, I was in Los Angeles, and it wasn't East LA. That was Hispanic. It was in what we once started calling South Central LA.
Oh yeah.
They didn't call it that then, and now you're not supposed to because it's got such a bad flavor to it, some people say.
Yeah. Amazing. You went to Crenshaw?
No, I didn't. Crenshaw hadn't even been built then.
Really?
I went supposed to go to manual arts, and then parents got tired of getting broken in. They were trying to do right, so um, wound up going over toward the Crenshaw area, and I went to Dorsey High.
Oh. I
Went
remember.
to John Muir Junior High, and then before that, Budlong Avenue Elementary School. So if you know LA, you know where they are. So yeah.
Yeah, when I first moved to LA in '68 from Alabama, I lived over there um, near Crenshaw on 6th Avenue. And I remember seeing the kids coming home from school from Dorsey, and every day they would fight all the way from school to home. There would be fights all the way. And I'm like, what the? I had never seen that before. It was amazing to see it. Either the girls were fighting the girls or the boys were fighting the boys, but they would have fights every day. It was amazing.
Yeah, it
You
got exciting.
so when you were going to school there, were there fights like that at that time?
Well, I can remember one time I came to school. I was in the eighth grade, and somebody that had just graduated from the ninth grade, he was going to Mantle. He came there and he was hung by his neck from the flagpole, and his belly had been cut open, and the 10 feet between where his body was and the ground, his guts were drooping down. And we had a lot of violence and stuff going on. They had gangs then, Slausons, Vigdale Vikings, businessmen, Bobtown, De La Soul, and such like. But that disappeared in 1965 when they had the uprising in August. All of the frustration, aggression, and tension and stress seemed to evaporate, and people started becoming more congenial toward each other and interested in a bigger picture than had been the case.
When I was growing up, there were no fights. It wasn't fighting one another. And I went to all black school, and I remember one time me and one guy fought over a baseball bat. It was my time to bat up. He thought it was his time, but then my mother, my grandmother and grandparents got on me about that. But I didn't see a lot of fights at all until I went up to Indiana. What changed with the blacks to make them fight so much and so much violence?
Well, 1965, it dropped way down. For an 18-month period between August 1965 and the end of that time period, there were only two black on black homicides in LA. And if I recall correctly, that was two ladies shot the men in their lives because they thought they were running around on them. The burglaries dropped to zero. The robberies dropped to zero. The rapes dropped to zero. The assaults dropped down to practically nothing because nobody was mad. But 1968, 69, it started going back up because the FBI, LAPD's SIS unit, and other of these alphabet entities were infiltrating the black movement, the Hispanic or brown beret movement, Native American movement. And there was a lot of treacherous internal stuff going on, and people started turning against each other, and Johnson didn't run, and a lot of minorities felt there was no longer any hope, and Freaky Dick got in, and things started building back up again. Stressed out, Hollywood was going broke, and they got a new crowd in there that was into this thing about we have to deliver product to an unrepresented audience that will eat it up. Let's go to the lowest common denominator, and instead of dealing with uplifting stuff, they started the black exploitation thing, Black Caesar, Superfly, Foxy Brown, and that kind of stuff. And now I can look at stuff that I see on TV and in the movies uh, that's regular fare, and I get badly offended by it. And other people, oh, they loved it. It was really great, man. Did you check it out? You didn't see so and so, huh? You see, they've become so inured to it over the last half century that they have become perfect victims of the propaganda, and they believe it. So when I studied propaganda at UCLA, amongst other things, one of the signs that you have been successful is when your target starts thinking and talking and speaking and ideating in terms of the propaganda you've been feeding them.
Amazing.
So we do.
Yeah. I wanted to ask, you mentioned that you went to school one day and someone was hanging from a tree, guts hanging out.
Oh, from the flagpole out in front of the school.
Was that done by other blacks or other races?
Other blacks.
Other blacks. That's amazing. Was it?
Oh, we used to have killings all the time. I think by the time I got 15 or so, I'd seen 13 or 14 people killed within 15, 25 yards of where I was standing. It was no big deal. People died all the time.
Amazing.
And see, I saw somebody got his gut slashed out with a linoleum knife. I saw 5 people die by fire when somebody torched a nightclub across the street from where I used to live on Normandy. Oh, I've seen people stabbed. I've seen people shot. Baseball bat. I saw somebody done in with a baseball bat. All kinds of things.
Wow. So, being a young person at the time, were you affected by that in any way?
Looked like part of life. Yes, you were affected. It was like being in a war zone. But my old man had been in the war, so he got decorated. He came back. He'd tell us stories about it, but not all the stories. I didn't find out some things till later, but it was like, be brave. And see, the family on the mother's side was from Tennessee, so I'd been down there, and I know the dynamic of being back in the 50s and what that was about. I remember before we moved to Los Angeles when I was about 5. For a brief time, we were down in Tuskegee, Alabama, where my mother was a librarian with Tuskegee Institute. And I remember we were coming from Tuskegee Institute back to Jackson, Tennessee, where our people lived. And I know we crossed through a suburb that was one of these sundown towns type things. And she handed me her Coca-Cola. She loved these things, one of the small bottles, and she wanted to fish in the glove compartment. And I put the bottle on my knee. I'm sitting in the back seat. And 3 shots were fired at the car we were in. I guess the shooters were trying to shoot the old man who was driving, but they didn't properly lead. So one bullet went through the left rear passenger door and it shattered the bottle of Coke on my knee. I was worried that my mother was going to pitch a fit, but she was cool. She just said, baby, lie down on the floor. But I said, are they shooting at us? Because in those days, a whole lot of black folk had been in the war and they'd tell stories about that. We'd hang on every word.
Yeah.
So I kept wanting to look because it was exciting to me. And she was cool. We had to repair the car. There were 3 bullet holes in it, but I mean, that was a reality.
Amazing. Wow. I
Or 1968. Let's fast forward. I'm grown. I was in my 20s, and I was working with the university. So myself and two other guys, we were running an errand for a professor. We had to go out to Anaheim. We couldn't find the place. And it turned out to be 2 blocks from Disneyland's parking lot. Cop pulled us over, said, "Are you trying to find something?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Well, gentlemen," he said, "I understand why you can't find it because it's in an alley, and the alley's not really marked." And he gave us good instructions. And he said, "Now, it's winter, so there are about 35 minutes of daylight. I'd strongly urge you to complete your errand because when it turns dark, you're not going to be sir, you're going to be nigger. Do you understand what I'm saying? So get out of here." And Inglewood, which is the place to be, you didn't go through Inglewood back then unless maybe you had a written pass from somebody you worked for as a domestic or you worked in their business. That was just not a place for black folk to be in after dark.
That's amazing.
So, I mean,
Amazing.
changes. And that was California. Let's not get into Tennessee and Mississippi and Alabama and Georgia.
So, do you believe things are worse now or better?
Uh, it's not a matter of belief, but my opinion is that they're a lot better. It's what upsets people is more psychological now than it is physical, lethal. The police are Boy Scouts these days. I've seen LAPD. Give you an example. I was just in law school. Um, we had a certain professor that liked to do pro bono work for criminal cases. So we were helping him with his investigation. And we were out by Santa Monica. And we're talking to the witnesses, and we're on a front porch. Some guy came up proud. He just gotten Oldsmobile 882, brand new, just left the lot. And he parked it out front and he was bragging about it. Somebody drunk came along, sideswiped 6 or 7 cars, including his, and then crashed into a phone pole, got out, staggered around, and fell unconscious across the crumpled up hood. Well, we called the police. Nobody showed up. Half hour, 45 minutes, an hour, and finally several of the residents called and they got a sergeant out there. And just as he arrived, 2 uniformed patrol type arrived. So they said they had better things to do than to worry about somebody who was drunk driving. Well, look, he's getting ready to get up over there. The sergeant said, "I said we have better things to do." And the guy whose car got hit was pretty upset. So the sergeant said, "You want something to get upset about? I'll show you." He pulled out his 4-inch K-frame Smith, the 38, rammed it into the guy's left shoulder and shot him. Said, "Now you got something to worry about." He said, "Come on, guys." And they went and left, and we had to get him to the emergency room. And when the law professor, we law students went down to help out, they have a book that had all the pictures of the people assigned to the precinct, and they had 3 pictures that were obviously removed. And well, you guys can't seem to find anyone who matches the description or that you can recall. Certainly, that means nobody in this precinct was involved. Speaking of law school, they used to hate this one professor, not the one we were working for there, but another one. So LAPD would come drive up and they'd park next to his car at a meter. The meters would only go for 1 hour. within a mile radius of campus. So as soon as it ran out, they would drive over to the law school, march in, and arrest him for a parking ticket. See, in California at the time, that was an infraction that you could be arrested for, even though it was only a $2 parking ticket. So several times they'd get him, and we'd all go down with another few professors, and they'd say, "Oh my God, certainly we wouldn't do that. We couldn't have him in there. And anyway, we get 48 hours before we have to charge anybody." So the law professor would be in there for 48 hours. And heaven help you if you got busted on a Thursday or Friday, you'd spend the whole
Yeah.
weekend in there. So, I
Amazing.
mean, this is LAPD. This was crazy.
It sounds like a
They,
movie. It sounds like,
yeah, in fact, movies. You ever seen LA Confidential or Mulholland Drive? Both of them have this thing in there, which was a true incident. LAPD detectives marched into City Hall, went up to the 17th floor where the DA had his office. This is the elected DA. They didn't like something he had done, so they grabbed him, opened up the window 17 floors above the ground, and hung him out by his heels and threatened to drop him if he
amazing.
didn't do what they wanted. So LAPD ran LA they ran City Hall instead of the other way around. It used to be rough. I mean,
Wow.
that's just LA. It in the South, you didn't travel in the daytime. You'd sleep at a colored motel, or you'd look at this green book that they called it. The Sinclair Oil came out, and they'd have a list with phone numbers and addresses of places where colored and other minorities could stay during the day. So you travel at night on these little 2-lane dangerous roads, and your lights weren't like they are now. And if you couldn't find any place to stay, you'd stop and ask some of the field hands where it was safe to pull into some woods, and they'd tell you, and you'd pull up next to a stream, and you'd sleep during the day and travel at night. Otherwise, you could come out when you got within 38 miles of home. As soon as you got out, it was daytime. "All right, boy, what you doing here?" "Well, we're going to visit kinfolk." "Well, who you going to visit?" "Well, we're going to see Mary Wallach, Aunt Mary." "You know Mary Wallach and Biz Wallach, them's your people." "Okay, well, I tell you what, that Trooper Jackson gonna pull you over by 3, 4 miles up here. We don't like no strange colored in the neighborhood, but you just tell him you spoke to Trooper Johnson or Thomas, whatever, and you tell him you're going to see the Wallachs. You be all right, boy. Now, don't cause no trouble while you're here. You hear what I'm saying?"
What the? So there's so much I
So,
want to talk to you about in time going by. How did you manage to survive all that?
got taught that maybe you wouldn't, but if you didn't, make sure you went out for the right purposes. So be brave and courageous. Never back down from a fight. If you had to make a strategic retreat, then you did that, but come back later and do payback. So that's how I got raised. So it's kind of been the life mission,
That's
do the
amazing.
right thing.
And so did you grow up in fear? Were you a fear that something may happen or no fear?
Well, it was not that you didn't have a healthy fear of potential harm. Where I grew up, you didn't just walk around the corner. You looked around the corner carefully to see if the wrong people were on the street. Then you went down that way. When you went home from school, you got with your homeboys, and we're going out the southeast gate. Everybody meet up over there, so wouldn't go out the wrong gate. Because when I was in junior high/middle school. We didn't call it middle school
Right.
then.
Yeah.
They had a lot of street gang activity. Got to Dorsey High, it wasn't as bad. Though if you saw this movie, Boys in the Hood, that was 25 almost 30 years after the fact, but that was kind of the reality. You just did not la-di-da walk out. You tried to keep a situational awareness because it wasn't safe not to.
Amazing.